By the time I reached La Rosa Hall, the white box balanced in my arms had gone damp underneath. Buttercream did that in late May if you walked too fast and held too much of your life together with your elbows. I should have let the cake fall. That was the absurd thought I had while standing under the black iron awning, staring through glass doors polished so clean they reflected a stranger back at me. My veil bag hung from one wrist. My cancelled wedding contract was folded in my purse. My grandmother's ring sat in my fist so tightly the old gold edge had already started carving its shape into my skin. Inside, men in dark suits moved with the eerie quiet of people who had learned how to take up space without making noise. The lobby smelled expensive: white lilies, marble dust, lemon oil. Something colder underneath, metallic enough that my shoulders tightened before my mind caught up. Blood, I thought, not fresh, cleaned. A woman at the reception desk looked at the box in my arms, then at my face, and gave me the kind of smile people use when they want you gone but still believe themselves to be well-mannered. "We're closed for private business. I'm not here for a booking." My voice came out too even. I hated that it trembled everywhere except where people could hear. "My wedding was supposed to be here next month. Adrian Voss canceled the contract this morning. I need to speak to someone about the deposit." Her smile thinned. "Deposits are non-refundable. He canceled, I didn't. That is not our concern." The box slipped in my damp hands. I caught it against my hip. Buttercream smeared the cardboard. I had spent 6 hours piping sugar roses for a wedding that no longer existed, because I had not known it no longer existed until Adrian's sister called and cried harder than I did. Or maybe I hadn't cried, not really. I had been too busy scraping my lungs off the floor. "I can't lose that money," I said. "That deposit was my father's insurance check." "My bakery, that is not our concern. There are rejections that happen softly. A letter, a voicemail, a man who cannot manage eye contact. Then there are rejections that happen in bright rooms with polished floors, while a stranger decides your life is administrative." I set the cake box on the reception desk before I dropped it. The top had caved in at one corner. One sugar rose had broken loose and rolled into a stripe of pink across the white icing. "My concern," I said quietly, "is that your client vanished with my money and half my order list. That is also not our concern." Behind me, a door opened. No one announced him, no one had to. The air changed first, that was what I noticed. It tightened. Men who had been pretending not to watch suddenly stood straighter, stiller. Italian moved in a low murmur from somewhere behind the lobby, then stopped in the middle of a sentence. I turned because everyone else did. He walked in wearing a charcoal suit with no tie. His shirt open at the throat, dark hair pushed carelessly back as if he had run a hand through it once and not bothered again. He wasn't handsome in the soft way magazines promised women they should trust. He was severe, controlled, the kind of face that made softness look temporary. There was a line of red on one cuff. Not his, I thought, and almost choked on the fact that I thought it so quickly. His gaze passed over the room once. Men lowered theirs. Then it landed on me, on the ruined cake, on the receptionist's suddenly bloodless face. "What is this?" His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The woman swallowed. "A misunderstanding, Mr. Salvator." He looked at the cake again. "I asked what this is. I should have been smart. I should have stepped back, apologized, left with what remained of my dignity and the crushed roses and my empty future." Instead, one of the men behind him moved too quickly, his shoe catching the fallen sugar flour on the floor and grinding it into the marble. "No," I said. The word flew out of me before fear could catch it. Every head in the lobby turned. I crouched before I understood what a spectacularly terrible idea that was. The little sugar rose had shattered flat under leather. Beside it, my grandmother's ring slipped from my hand and spun once across the floor. The man's shoe came down half over it. My pulse went white. I looked up at the stranger in the charcoal suit because everyone else already seemed to belong to him. "Please tell him to move." The silence after that could have cracked glass. The man with the shoe jerked back so fast the heel squealed on marble. The ring lay there, bent slightly where the edge had taken the weight. I picked it up with fingers that did not feel connected to me. Buttercream from the cake had gotten on the gold. I wiped it off with my thumb and tried, stupidly, automatically, to straighten the bent circle before I even stood. When I looked up, the stranger was watching my hand. Not my face, my hand. "Open it," he said. I didn't. Something in his expression changed, not anger. Recognition sharpened into something worse. "Open your hand." My fingers loosened because I was suddenly more afraid of not obeying than I was of him seeing the ring. Old gold, oval face, black enamel worn thin with age. Inside the band, hidden unless you knew where to press, there was a tiny hinge my grandmother had shown me once and made me swear never to force. He crossed the distance between us, not fast. That would have been easier to read. When he stopped, I caught the scent of cold night air in his clothes beneath expensive cologne. Cedar, smoke, rain that had touched stone. Where did you get this? It was my grandmother S. What was her name? Rosa Bellini. He took the ring from my palm, his fingers brushed my skin only once, cool, deliberate. The crescent mark the band had cut into me flashed red in the lobby light, his jaw locked. The receptionist made a strangled sound like she wanted to apologize to someone and couldn't decide whether it should be God or me. She says she came about a deposit, one of the men murmured. The stranger never looked away from the ring, and she was turned away. Yes, boss, of course. He pressed something at the underside of the ring with his thumb, then stilled when it didn't give. When he finally looked at me, there was nothing kind in his face. But there was nothing dismissive either, and I had already learned the difference in a single terrible day. What did your grandmother tell you about this? Not enough. Did your fiancé ever touch it? The question hit oddly. No. Did anyone ask about it? No. A lie would have been safer, I knew that. My pulse knew it, my knees knew it, but the whole day had already been built on someone else's lie. I couldn't climb onto another one without feeling myself disappear. His gaze dropped just briefly to the crushed sugar rose still stuck to the marble, then to the bent ring in his hand, then back to me. No one in that room breathed. Little saint, he said, like the words were an observation and not affection, you should have lied. I didn't understand why that made heat rise into my face. He turned without hurry. Lock the hall down, pull every camera from the last 48 hours, find Adrian Voss. My heart stopped. What? He looked over his shoulder. You're coming with me. I am absolutely not. A few men in the room made the mistake of moving as if that answer mattered. The boss lifted one hand, everything froze again. He looked at the ruined cake, take the box, then at me, bring her too. I should have run. Instead, I stood there in buttercream-stained flats, my cancelled wedding in my bag, and watched a man I had never seen change the direction of my life, with less effort than most people use to light a cigarette. The glass doors opened. I walked through them because every other choice had just closed. If fear had a texture, it would be the back seat of Dante Salvator's car, not soft leather. Not the chilled air from hidden vents. Not the silence, even though there was enough of it to start hearing your own pulse like a separate person. Fear was the feeling of being moved somewhere by men who did not ask twice. Chicago slid past in fragments of wet asphalt and traffic lights blurred by a light rain. My cake box sat on the seat beside me like evidence. Across from me, angled in the jump seat, a man with tired eyes and a broken nose watched the street through the tinted glass and pretended not to watch me. No one had taken my phone. That was almost worse. It meant they didn't think I could do anything useful with it. Dante sat in front, not looking back once. I tried Adrian 3 times anyway, straight to voicemail. Then my bakery, no answer. Then my Aunt Teresa, I hung up before it rang long enough to worry her. At some point, the city thinned and iron gates swung open onto a stretch of dark gravel lined with cypress and planters large enough to hide men. The house beyond wasn't a house in any normal sense. It was stone and old money and window light, broad-shouldered against the night, not ostentatious. Worse, it had the confidence of something that had never needed permission. The man across from me finally spoke. When we get out, stay on the left side of the drive. Why? Because if you don't, Paolo starts yelling in Sicilian about tire marks. I stared at him. He looked almost offended. That was me being welcoming. The car stopped beneath a covered portico. Rain ticked softly on the roof. A woman in a dark dress opened the front door before anyone touched it. She was maybe in her late 40s, beautiful in the way time had sharpened rather than softened, with silver threaded at her temples and eyes that missed nothing. Her gaze took in my smeared sleeve, the cake box, my face. It did not linger on the men with guns. Madonna, she said, he brought home trouble before dinner. The man across from me sighed. Maria, if you start, I'll never recover. She sniffed. You were never in danger of recovery, Nico. So this was Nico. He touched his chest as if wounded. I've had grilled chicken for 12 straight days. If Dr. Lucia still refuses to love me after that, I'm going back to sausage on principle. You were never on grilled chicken, Maria said. I saw you hide cannoli in the glove compartment. Nico looked at me with tragic dignity. You see how I'm treated. Against all reason, a laugh almost escaped me. Dante got out of the car. The near laughter died so fast it hurt. Inside, the house smelled like polished wood, coffee, old stone warmed by heat, and whatever Maria had put in the oven to make grown men confess their sins. The floors were blackened white marble. My flats made almost no sound on them. The men did. Dante handed the ring to Maria without explanation. Her face changed when she saw it, not surprise. Recognition with history under it. That frightened me more than anything so far. Guest room, he said. Maria lifted a brow. With a lock, with a door, that was not my question. His gaze flicked to me once. A door. Maria looked satisfied by something in the answer I did not understand. She took the cake box from my hands before I realized how tightly I was gripping it. What happened to this poor thing? Life, I said, her mouth softened despite herself. Come, I followed her up a staircase wide enough for a bride to descend and regret it halfway down. At the landing, I looked back. Dante was still in the foyer. Men had gathered near him in a low semicircle. He stood very still while they spoke. No one interrupted him, no one touched him. Power, I realized, wasn't volume in his world. It was how quiet other people became around it. Maria showed me into a room larger than my apartment above the bakery. Pale walls, long drapes, iron balcony doors. A bed too big for one person without strong opinions about loneliness. You may shower, she said. There are clothes in the wardrobe. Eat if you can, mister. Salvatore will speak with you when he decides to. That's comforting. It was not meant to be. She set the ruined cake on a small table by the window and turned toward the door. Maria, she paused. Am I a prisoner? Her expression stayed measured. That depends on whether your life outside this house is safer than your life inside it. That was not an answer. Which meant it probably was. When I was alone, I sat on the edge of the bed and finally let myself unwrap the day in pieces. Adrian's message at 7:13 that morning, don't come to the bakery. I can't do this, I'm sorry, the calls after, his sister crying, the venue contract, the empty account where my deposit money should have been, the old panic of numbers that no longer added up. I showered because I didn't know what else to do. Maria had stocked the bathroom with plain cotton clothes, black leggings, a soft cream sweater, slippers that made me feel like an intruder. When I came back out, someone had repaired the cake box lid. The sugar rose, however, lay in fragments on a plate beside it. I sat down and began fixing it. I always did that. Broken piping bags. Split fondant, a loosened hinge on the bakery freezer. My father used to say I didn't know how to leave a thing ruined once my hands had found it. I had nearly coaxed one pedal back into place with buttercream when a knock sounded. Not loud, not uncertain. Dante stepped in after a beat, as if closed doors were things he respected only until he chose otherwise. He had changed his shirt. The line of red was gone. His sleeves were rolled once. I noticed his hands because I was trying not to notice his face. Your fiancé stole from you, he said. No greeting, of course. I set the pedal down. That seems to be the theme of my week. His bank card was used an hour ago at a gas station in Joliet. A cold thread slid down my spine. You found him? Not yet. I stood because he was standing. Why do you care? His gaze moved to the cake in pieces on the table, then to the ringless mark in my palm. That ring belonged to my mother. The room went very still around us. That's impossible. No, he stepped closer enough that I felt it more than saw it. What's impossible is that your grandmother had it and died without anyone telling me. I'm sorry, I said, because it was the only true thing I had. I didn't know. He watched me for a long second. I believe you. I hated how much relief that caused. But belief, he said, is not trust. He took the repaired sugar rose from the plate, looked at the wet seam where I had fixed the break, and set it down again with surprising care. Until I know how that ring came to you, you stay here. I have a bakery. I know, I have a life. His face changed in some small, unreadable way. That should have made me hate him. Instead, it landed in the empty space Adrian had left and found the truth there first. He moved toward the door, then paused. There are rules. I folded my arms so he wouldn't see my hands shake. Of course there are. You don't leave the grounds. I assumed. You don't answer unknown numbers. I thought of Adrian's voicemail. Why? Because if someone is looking for that ring, they may try you before they try me. The words should have comforted me. They didn't. He looked at the broken cake. And stopped trying to salvage what was built for the wrong man. Then he left, closing the door so gently it felt more final than a slam. A minute later, I heard the lock in my chest turn, quiet and absolute. The next morning I woke before dawn because I had spent too many years tied to ovens to trust sleeping past sunrise. For a few blessed seconds, I forgot where I was. Then I saw the carved plaster ceiling, the long drapes breathing with lake wind, and the chair by the door where no one sat but someone had clearly sat at some point. Watching, guarding. In this house, I was beginning to understand. The difference was mostly decorative. I dressed in borrowed clothes and followed the smell of coffee downstairs. The kitchen was bigger than Bellini Bakery. That thought almost offended me on principle. Copper pans hung over a central island. Light from the garden doors spread pale across the stone counters. Two women in aprons spoke rapid Italian over crates of produce. Maria stood at the stove commanding heat like she had invented it. She looked up when I entered. You chew when you worry. I blinked. What? You're chewing the inside of your cheek. She pointed with a wooden spoon. Sit, eat. I almost said I couldn't. Then I noticed she had already put together a plate of eggs, toast, sliced pear, and coffee strong enough to restore moral character. So I sat. Men moved through the hall beyond the kitchen in quiet currents. Some nodded to Maria, none to me. I heard Dante's voice once in the next room, low and clipped, and the entire kitchen changed temperature without anyone mentioning him. Maria caught me listening. That one, she said, hasn't let anyone sleep in peace since he was 14. You've known him that long? Longer. She slid dough onto the counter and began kneading with efficient violence. I sewed his mother's wedding veil. He was born 3 months later and came out glaring. I stared at her. Why didn't you say that last night? Because last night you looked like a girl standing under falling bricks. Information is wasted on people trying not to die. Fair, I ate. Not because I was hungry. Because Maria's kitchen made refusing feel like a character flaw. By 10, helplessness had started itching under my skin so hard I could barely stay in one place. I found myself reorganizing a rack of spices that no one had asked me to touch, then trimming bruised basil leaves. Then automatically reaching for flour when I saw unbaked tart shells lined on a tray. Maria watched this for exactly 6 minutes. You can pipe? I looked up. I own a bakery. That did not answer the question. Yes, she jerked her chin toward a pastry bag. Show me. I should probably have been more insulted. Instead, I took the bag, tested the pressure, and filled 12 tart shells with lemon cream in even spirals so smooth Maria made a small approving sound through her nose and pretended she hadn't. By noon, there were sugared orange peels cooling on parchment, and I had somehow become useful. That was when Nico found me. He leaned into the kitchen with sunglasses pushed up in his dark hair and a paper folder in one hand. Good news, no one has shot me yet. Maria didn't turn. Day is young, he pressed a hand to his heart. Your faith sustains me. Then he noticed the tray in front of me. What is that? Lemon tartlets. He closed the folder. I would like 6. You would like death, Maria said. Lucia told you to stop eating sugar. Nico lowered his voice and addressed me directly. The woman enjoys my suffering. It's how she flirts. It is not, Maria said. She once told me my blood work was disappointing. If that's not intimacy, what is? Against my will, I smiled. He saw it and pointed at me triumphantly. There, proof that I bring light into this mausoleum. A shadow moved across the doorway behind him. Nico sighed without turning. In darkness, Dante stepped into the kitchen, and every person inside it subtly corrected their posture. He wore the same control he wore everything else. I hated that I could recognize the sound of his steps already. His gaze found the tartlets, then me, then the flower at my wrist. You're working. I was breathing, I said. It happened nearby. Nico made a noise like he might laugh if he didn't value his continued employment. Dante handed Maria a thin envelope. Have Tommaso drive Miss Bellini to her bakery. She has 20 minutes. I stood too fast. What? You said you had a life. His tone gave nothing away. You can see what remains of it. My stomach dropped. Tommaso turned out to be the man from the car with the tired eyes and broken nose. He drove a black sedan like it was a church procession and opened my bakery door before I could reach it. The front window had been smashed in, not looted, searched. There was a difference. Cash drawer intact, register untouched, flour tracked across the tile in boot prints, recipe binders ripped open. The back office turned inside out. Someone had slit the cushions on the bench where my father used to nap between lunch rush and weddings. My breath snagged on a sound that might have been mine. Tommaso didn't touch me. I noticed that because other people always did when they wanted grief to hurry along. Nothing taken? He asked. I shook my head, then crouched beside the fallen tins under the display case. An old biscuit tin lay dented near the wall. My grandmother's handwriting on the lid buttons had been split clean through by someone looking for something hidden beneath. She had kept letters there, recipes, sewing needles. Things too small to matter until they were gone. I opened it with numb hands. Empty. Behind me, Tommaso went very quiet. On the floor beneath the counter, a single strip of paper had torn free from whatever had been inside. I picked it up. If anything happens, do not trust, that was all. The rest had ripped away. My pulse went wild. Tommaso took the paper from my fingers and slid it carefully into his coat. Mr. Salvetter needs to see this. I rounded on him. That was my grandmother S, and someone tore your bakery apart for it. His voice stayed gentle, which means this stopped being only yours. I hated that he was right. When we got back to the car, Dante was waiting beside it. He had not come inside. I wasn't sure whether that was mercy or strategy. What did they take? He asked. My grandmother's letters. And the ring stayed with you? Yes. Why? Because I don't leave it in tins labeled buttons. Something flickered in his expression, not amusement exactly. Recognition, maybe. I got in the car without his help because I did not trust what even courtesy from him would do to my balance. On the drive back, I stared at the torn edge of my life and understood something I had been resisting since the foyer. This wasn't about Adrian. It wasn't even about me. Whatever had begun before I was born had finally reached up and learned my name. That night I stood at the balcony doors in my borrowed sweater and watched men cross the courtyard below, armed and silent under lantern light. For one brief second, Dante paused beneath the stone arch and looked up. He could not possibly have seen me clearly through the dark glass. Still, he lifted one hand to his mouth, thinking, and I caught the bright metal flash of a lighter he never struck. Then he disappeared into the night with my unanswered questions and the feeling that someone was already closing in. Rain started just after midnight and stayed. By morning the house sounded wrapped in it, water at the windows, water in the gutters, water whispering over stone. I woke from a dream I couldn't remember except for a ballroom floor and the sense that I had arrived too late for something. Maria found me in the kitchen before 7, already dressed and tying my hair back. You bake when you can't think straight. I think better with butter. That is the first wise thing anyone under 30 has said to me all week. She had left me dough to roll and citrus to zest. No questions. It was the first kindness I had recognized as kindness in days. Tommaso came in around 8 with Rain on his shoulders and a file tucked under one arm. Unlike Nico, he never entered a room like he expected it to become a stage. He came in like a man measuring exits. He accepted coffee from Maria, then looked at me. You should know something before you hear it from someone less decent. My hand stopped over the flower. That sounds terrible. It often is. He set the file on the counter. Your fiancé didn't only run, he's tied to a shell company used by Corrado Vitelli. I frowned. Who? Underboss, Maria said flatly. Smile like a priest, soul like mold. Tommaso ignored that. He's one of the few men Dante trusts with money roots. The room tilted a fraction. Adrian knew mafia people. Adrian knew men who paid on time, Tommaso said. That's enough for some people. I thought of Adrian counting delivery receipts at my bakery with those careful fingers, talking about expansion, about marriage, about stability. I had built so much around his steadiness that realizing it had all been rented felt obscene. What does Corrado want with me? Tommaso's eyes moved briefly to my empty hand. Likely not you. The ring. Maria muttered something in Italian that needed no translation. At noon Dante sent for me, not to his office. To a small sitting room at the back of the house with windows full of rain and a fire lit against the damp. There were no guards visible, which probably meant there were more than usual. He stood by the mantel, sleeves rolled, one hand braced on the stone as if stillness cost him effort when no one was looking. On the low table before him lay the ring, my grandmother's torn note, and an old photograph sealed in plastic. I crossed the room carefully, as though sudden movement might change the temperature. Sit, I didn't, I'd rather stand. His gaze skimmed over me once, unreadable. As you like. He picked up the photograph and handed it over. A younger Maria stood outside a church beside a beautiful dark-haired woman in a veil. The woman's hand rested over her stomach. On her finger was the ring, the same black enamel oval, the same age-softened gold, unmistakable even through the grain of old film. My hand tightened on the plastic sleeve. She was wearing it at her wedding, I said. Dante's voice stayed level. An hour before she died. Something moved in his face and vanished so quickly I would have missed it if I hadn't already begun studying the fractures in him the way I studied cracked glaze before it. Split completely. She died here, in this hall, Maria said quietly from the doorway. I hadn't heard her enter. Back when La Rosa was smaller, before Dante rebuilt it. I looked up. Why? No one answered fast enough for comfort. Dante took the photograph from my hand, and for one brief second his fingers closed around my wrist with it. Not hard, not gentle either. The contact was cool and controlled and somehow more intimate than a grab would have been. My pulse kicked once against his thumb. He let go immediately, like the fact of my pulse had burned him. That answer comes later, he said. The fire cracked behind him. Rain whispered at the glass. What do you know now? I asked. That your grandmother hid something from men who would have killed her for it. He set the photo beside the note. And that she passed it to you, maybe because she trusted me, maybe because she ran out of time. A knock sounded once. Nico leaned into the room with a bulletproof vest hanging from one finger. I would just like the record to show, he said solemnly, that this vest makes me look broad in a deeply unflattering way, and if Lucia sees my silhouette and mistakes me for a refrigerator, I'll never recover. Even Maria closed her eyes. Dante didn't look at him. What? Corrado-s asking questions about the bakery attack before being told there was a bakery attack. Nico's humor thinned by a degree. Also, Paolo says the Eastgate guard lied about his shift. The room chilled. Dante's gaze went distant in that dangerous, inward way I was starting to understand meant decisions were being made that would hurt someone. He picked up the ring, turned it once, then held it out to me. Keep it on you. I took it. The metal was colder than it should have been. You trust me with it? No. His eyes met mine. I trust what you do when something is broken. The breath caught in my throat so abruptly I hated him a little for noticing. Nico looked between us and muttered, "Well." That wasn't unsettling at all. Dante ignored him, of course he did. He moved toward the door, then paused beside me, close enough that the dark cedar of his cologne reached me under the smoke from the fire. "Little saint," he said, low enough that only I heard it. "From this point on, if I tell you to run, you run. And if I do," he looked at the mark the ring had left in my palm. "Then I come after you." He walked out before I could decide whether that was a threat or a promise. It felt like both. I didn't mean to open the ring. That was the lie I told myself for an hour before I admitted. I had spent the entire morning thinking about the tiny seam beneath the enamel face, and the way Dante's thumb had found it without hesitation. Men like him did not survive by overlooking details. If he knew where the hinge was, then someone had shown him once. Maybe his mother. Maybe the same woman in the photograph whose smile had looked too alive for the marble floor Maria described. By afternoon, the house had fallen into one of its false silences. The kind that meant danger was moving elsewhere, not gone. I took the ring to my room and sat at the writing desk by the window with a butter knife from the kitchen and a dish towel under my hands. My grandmother had taught me how to handle old sugar molds in delicate spun glass. Never force, warm the metal first, find where it wants to yield. I breathed on the ring. Pressed gently under the face. Nothing, pressed again, this time at an angle. The top clicked, my heart nearly stopped. Inside, folded into a cavity no thicker than a thumbnail, was a strip of paper so old it threatened to become dust where I touched it. I unfolded it with shaking fingers. Not words, numbers. Fractions, ingredient names in my grandmother's shorthand. 1.5 blood orange, 4 honey, 12 salt scent, Agnes/Thursday/bells. It looked like a ruined recipe. Unless you had spent your life measuring grief in grams and heat in minutes, then it looked like code. A knock sounded. Before I could cover the paper, Maria stepped in carrying fresh towels, and one look at my face was enough. "What have you done?" I held up the ring. She crossed the room so fast I barely had time to sit back. "Madonna." Her fingers hovered over the paper without touching it. "Show Dante, he'll take it." Yes, it was my grandmother S. Maria looked at me then, really looked, and something in her expression softened. "Child. Keeping a thing and surviving a thing are not always the same task." I took it downstairs anyway. Dante was in his office with Tommaso and Nico, the three of them bent over a map scattered with pins and names. Nico had somehow acquired almonds and was eating them with the secretive guilt of a man cheating on 7 diets at once. He saw me first. "If this is about the tartlets, I admit nothing." "It is." Dante looked up. The room shifted focus around him. I put the strip of paper on his desk. He didn't reach for it immediately. "What is it?" "What was inside the ring?" Tommaso went very still. Nico stopped chewing. Dante unfolded the strip, read it once, then looked at me in a way that made the air feel thinner. "How did you open it?" "With a butter knife." Nico let out a soft, reverent whistle. "She says that like it isn't deeply romantic." "No one asked you," Tommaso said. "It was the butter knife part specifically." Dante ignored them. "What does it mean?" I stepped closer to the desk because the paper seemed easier to explain from near it. "Not a recipe, not exactly. My grandmother wrote some things in kitchen ratios, numbers disguised as ingredients. My father did it too when suppliers got nosy." His gaze sharpened. "Go on." "Blood orange could mean red shipments, honey is cash, salt is docks or storage, scent. Agnes is probably the chapel on Halsted. The bells ring Thursday evenings for food bank collection." Tommaso reached for the map. Nico stopped him. "Wait. She got all that from 4 ingredients?" I shrugged, suddenly self-conscious under all their attention. "Baking is chemistry with better manners." Nico pressed a hand to his chest. "I'm in love with her." Tommaso didn't even look up. "Lucia will be relieved." Nico muttered something obscene and very Catholic under his breath. Dante's mouth didn't change, but I had the strange feeling he was closer to smiling than I had seen him yet. "We go tonight," he said. Tommaso nodded. "I'll prep the chapel." Dante's gaze cut to me. "You stay here." I crossed my arms. "Absolutely not." Nico looked delighted. "Ah. I see we've reached the stage where you say impossible things to each other for sport." Dante waited until the room emptied except for us. He had that gift for making other people understand they were no longer necessary without needing to say the words. When the door closed, he leaned back against his desk and studied me. "You opened the ring when I told you to keep it shut. You told me to keep it on me." A pause. "That was exact," he said. "I bake for a living." Exact is a moral requirement. He looked at the flower still faintly caught beneath one of my nails and then at the ring. "What else are you hiding?" The question landed too close to truth. Because there was something else. Not about the ring itself, but about the last time Adrian had asked to see my grandmother's old tins. 3 weeks before he vanished. He had laughed when I said no, kissed my forehead, and called me old-fashioned. I had not told Dante because saying it aloud would make me admit I had missed the crack before the collapse. "I'm not hiding anything," I said. The lie didn't survive his face. He pushed off the desk and came toward me slowly enough that I had time to want to retreat and not do it. Little Saint, that name had begun as cold observation. It landed differently now. Worse, maybe. 3 weeks ago, I said before courage failed, Adrian asked whether my grandmother ever kept valuables in the bakery. I thought he meant silver trays. "I didn't think you didn't know what mattered yet." "I should have. You were planning a wedding," he said. That makes intelligent women forgive idiocy in men every day. Something in me cracked wide enough for a laugh to escape. It startled both of us. He looked at me a second longer than necessary. Then his gaze dropped to the tray I'd left on the side table outside his office before coming in, a test batch of pastries I'd brought Maria and forgotten in the tension. "What are those?" I followed his eyes. "A new dessert. Does it have a name?" I hesitated. "Glass heart." He said nothing, so I heard myself continue. "Bitter chocolate on the bottom. Orange cream in the middle, burned sugar shell on top, looks hard until you touch it." His eyes lifted back to mine. "And then," he asked, "it cracks." The silence after that was too aware, too full. He reached past me for the tray, his sleeve brushing my arm. Not quite an embrace, not quite anything. One of those awful almost that left my skin remembering more than it should. "Stay in the house tonight," he said. "Dante, stay." It wasn't loud, it didn't need to be. Then he took one of the pastries, bit through the sugar shell, and closed the office door in front of me with my own metaphor still burning in the room. Scent. Agnes smelled like wet stone, candle smoke, and old dust that had settled into the pews decades before any of us got there. I was not supposed to be there. That part had been made aggressively clear by everyone with a weapon and one apron. Which was exactly why I waited until dusk, stole a black raincoat from the mudroom, and followed the second car at a distance in Tommaso's backup sedan, after bullying Nico into telling me which chapel on Halsted had Thursday bells. He protested the entire time. "For the record," he whispered as we crouched in the alley behind the church fence, "if I die because you have the moral instincts of a stray cat. I want Lucia to know I was heroic and also misunderstood. You're neither. That is very hurtful. Also probably fair." Inside the chapel, bells began to ring. Men moved in and out of the side door carrying boxes marked with canned food labels. Too heavy for food the way they handled them. Cash maybe, weapons, both if the world was behaving on theme. Dante stood in the shadows near the sacristy entrance with Tommaso and two men at his back. He looked like he belonged to the dark more than the church did, all stillness and decision. When he turned and saw me through the cracked side gate, something lethal entered the line of his shoulders. "Oh good," I thought wildly, "he's furious." That lasted 3 seconds. A shot broke the stained glass hush, then 3 more. Chaos came fast and efficiently. Men shouted in Italian. Someone went down near the altar. Nico swore with religious creativity beside me. The side door blew open and armed men poured from the street I had stupidly used as cover. Dante moved first, not toward shelter, toward me. He crossed the yard as if bullets altered themselves around him out of professional courtesy. Tommaso was a step behind, firing as he ran. I froze for exactly the amount of time required to become everyone's problem. Dante hit me hard enough to knock the breath out of me, his arm locking around my shoulders as he drove us behind the low stone wall lining the alley. A bullet struck the bricks above where my head had been. The sound was not what I expected, not cinematic, just ugly and close and final. "Are you hurt?" he said. "No, good." He rose before I could answer anything else, gun already in hand. He fired twice over the wall, then grabbed my face with his free hand just long enough to make sure I was looking at him. "When I say move, you move." I nodded because speech had abandoned me. Tommaso shouted, "Rear gate." Dante glanced once toward the chapel. Decision, cost, both visible for a split second, then he chose. "Go," he said. He got me to the second car by keeping his body between mine and every angle where death might arrive. At the door, another shot cracked. Dante jerked. For half a second I thought he'd fallen. Instead he slammed the car open with his shoulder and shoved me inside. Blood ran dark down his sleeve. "No," I said. "It missed bone. How do you know?" "I was there." Even bleeding, he sounded annoyed. Nico dove into the driver's seat. "Everyone buckle up." I hate action. We tore away from the curb as glass burst somewhere behind us. Dante kept one hand pressed to his side and the other on the back of my neck, forcing me below the window line until we cleared the block. Not possessive, protective. The distinction was meaningless to my pulse. Back at the house, Lucia Marino met us in a downstairs sitting room turned triage space. She was tall, dark-eyed, severe, and so unimpressed by masculine pain that I understood Nico's infatuation immediately. "You were shot," she said to Dante. "Grazed, you're bleeding on my floor, which seems like a vote for me being correct." Nico, pale under his usual charm, hovered by the door. "Lucia, if you need someone steady-handed, I once assembled a treadmill. You assembled it backward. It still ran. It ran into a wall," she pointed without looking at him. "Sit down before you faint theatrically." "I do not faint theatrically," he said, and then sat exactly as instructed. Dante stripped off his jacket. The bullet had torn through the flesh beneath his ribs, angry and shallow but ugly enough to turn my stomach. Lucia cleaned it with brisk cruelty. He did not flinch. I did, he noticed. "Look away, I'm fine, you're not, I'm still here." Something changed in his eyes then, a crack, then the seal over it again. Lucia stitched. Maria brought towels and muttered prayers in a tone suggesting she blamed every male in the house except the dead. Tommaso came in with blood on his cuff that wasn't his and said 2 men at the chapel had been Vitelli's, 1 dead and 1 gone. War, I thought. I knew it before anyone said it. By the time the room emptied, rain had started again. Dante stood at the window fastening a clean shirt with one hand while I sat on the chaise, too shaken to trust my legs. The house seemed to inhale around us. "You disobeyed me," he said. "Yes, you could have died, I know," he turned. The lamplight caught the angles of his face, the fresh bandage under his open collar, the fatigue he would never let his men see. "Why did you come?" "Because you were going somewhere that belonged to your mother. Because I could not bear being left behind while answers moved without me. Because something in me had begun leaning toward him before I gave it permission. Instead I said because I was useful." He came closer, stopped in front of me, not touching. "That's not the reason." My throat tightened. "I don't know what the reason is yet." His hand lifted as if he meant to touch my cheek, stopped an inch away, fell one more almost. "You should be afraid of me," he said quietly. I looked at the blood he had lost to keep me breathing. "I think I'm afraid of not being." He shut his eyes once briefly, like the sentence had landed somewhere that hurt. When he opened them, the restraint in him was visible, not absence of want. "The cost of holding it." "Little saint," he said, rougher now, "if I let myself do what I want right now, you'll mistake danger for safety." I don't know what gave me the courage to answer him honestly. Maybe shock. Maybe exhaustion. Maybe the way his restraint made me feel safer than permission would have. "So don't let me mistake it." For a long second, neither of us moved. Then he bent and pressed his forehead to mine. Only that, no kiss, no claim, just the weight of his breath and the terrible tenderness of being spared. Dante, he had wanted her the first moment she crouched on blood-cleaned marble and reached for the crushed sugar rose before her own pride. Then the ring. Bent gold, cut palm, shaking hands, and she fixed it instead of pleading. She reached for ruined things as if they were still worth saving. No one in his world had ever done that. No one had ever looked at him and not flinched first. When he pulled back, there was blood on his shirt and prayer bells still echoing in his bones. "Corrado started this," he said. I blinked. "You know that? I know enough." "Then what happens now?" His jaw hardened. "Now," he said, "Chicago learns what it costs to miss." And I knew war had already arrived. War did not begin with explosions. It began with absences. Men who should have been on the morning perimeter and weren't, deliveries rerouted, phones ringing once, then dead air. Maria sending 2 kitchen girls home before dawn without explanation. Dante sleeping less than a human body should survive and somehow getting quieter for it. The house learned tension by heart. So did I. 3 days after the chapel attack, Tommaso drove me to the bakery because the front windows had been boarded and I wanted, stupidly, desperately, to see whether the smell of yeast and orange zest still belonged to me. It did. Under the sawdust and broken glass and the sour remains of fear, it was still there. I was in the back room taking inventory of what could be salvaged when the delivery entrance burst inward. Tommaso moved before I had time to think. One arm went around my waist, throwing me behind the steel prep table just as 2 shots punched through the doorway. The sound tore the room in half. A third shot hit him. He made a noise I still hear some nights. "Tommaso, stay down." Blood spread through his coat at the shoulder, too dark, too fast. He kept firing one-handed toward the door while I crawled for my phone with fingers that would not close properly. Outside, tires screamed. One man shouted, then nothing but the whine of my own pulse. When Dante arrived, he did not waste a word asking whether I had listened, obeyed, or deserved rescue. He lifted the prep table off me with one hand and hauled Tommaso upright with the other while barking orders that made the alley flood with men. "Pressure here," he told me, pressing my hand over Tommaso's wound. I did it, hard. Tommaso's face had gone gray around the mouth, but he still managed. "You always this much trouble, Bellini. I'm becoming gifted at it." "Good," his breath sawed out. House was boring. Then Dante was beside us again, blood on his cuffs, eyes black with something colder than rage. Car. Now, at the estate, Lucia took Tommaso straight into the downstairs medical room. Maria shoved me into a chair and forced sweet coffee into my hand before I dropped from adrenaline and shock. My sweater sleeves were stiff with a man's blood, not a stranger's. Tommaso's, who warned me when truths were ugly and never once touched me without asking. Through the hall doors I heard Dante's voice once. Low, even, lethal, someone screamed after that. Nico appeared in the kitchen 20 minutes later with one sleeve torn and a bruise rising under his jaw. He sank into the chair across from me and stared at my untouched coffee. Lucia says if Tommaso dies, she'll kill 3 of us for wasting her stitches. I looked up too fast. Is he alive? For now. Nico rubbed a hand over his face. The humor in him was there but thin. He's stubborn, men like that survive to disappoint fate. My hands started shaking then, not dainty trembling, full, humiliating loss of control. Nico saw it and for once didn't make a joke immediately. He took the bullet because he saw the angle before you did, he said. That is not your sin. I brought danger there. No, he said softly, danger was already on its way. I looked at him, really looked. The expensive watch, the carelessly styled hair, the absurd diet complaints. And underneath them, a man who had been living in this machinery long enough to know exactly what it cost. I can leave, I said. He blinked. Technically. Don't joke, I'm not. He sat back suddenly tired. Dante has papers ready, new name, Naples if you want distance, Boston if you want obscurity. He told Maria to pack your things without asking because he knows if he asks, you'll hear the crack in his voice and stay out of spite. My breath stopped. He wants me gone. He wants you alive. Not the same thing, not different enough. By evening, Tommaso was out of surgery and not dead, which qualified as a miracle in this house. Dante came to my room after dark with a leather folder in one hand and a passport in the other. Rain tracked cold from his coat into the air behind him. He set everything on the desk. Car leaves at 6. I stared at the passport. The face was mine. The name was, so that's it. That's survival. I looked up. For who? A flicker, there and gone. For you and for you. His silence answered first. Then, Corrado wants the ring. He'll use you until he has it, and then he'll use your body to send me a message. I won't permit that. You don't get to decide for me. I do when the alternative is your corpse. The words hit hard enough to sting. He turned toward the door. I stood because if I stayed seated, I might beg, and I was not sure for what. Dante, he stopped. If I go, I said, hating how raw my voice sounded, what happens to the bakery? He didn't face me. The building can be sold. Maria found a buyer. And my father's name on it, silence again. That was the cost then, not only him, not only fear. The life I had built over grief and flour and unpaid bills. The proof that my father had existed at all. If I left, I might live. I would also surrender the last thing that had ever been purely mine. At dawn, I got in the car anyway. The city blurred past. The passport sat in my lap like an insult. At midway, men in Salvador suits hovered at discreet distances while travelers dragged ordinary lives through automatic doors. A child cried over dropped cereal. A woman argued into her phone about luggage weight. Somewhere, coffee burned. I stood in line for security and thought about Tommaso bleeding on bakery tile, about Maria sewing Dante's mother's veil, about Nico pretending humor was not how he survived, about Dante crossing a hail of bullets because I had made one stupid, human decision and appeared where I should not. Then I saw my hands. They were clenched hard enough that my nails had marked my palm in the shape of a crescent. The ring wasn't even there. I had left it in the house safe. Still, my hand remembered. Broken things, I thought, and something in me went very still. I stepped out of line. A guard called after me. I kept walking. By the time I reached the curb, rain had started, fine and cold. I got into the first taxi and gave the driver the only address that felt true. When the gates opened at the estate, Dante was already in the drive. He didn't move as I got out, didn't come toward me. Didn't ask why. I walked through the rain until I stood in front of him with my hair damp and my future in shreds. I know what this world costs now, I said. If I stay knowing. His face gave nothing away, only his hands at his sides tightened once. You can still live, he said. I know, a beat. Then I took one more step into the dark and chose it with my eyes open. I came back. I made my mistake the next morning. Not because I was foolish enough to think choosing to stay had made me suddenly competent in war, because I was relieved. And relief, I learned, can be more blinding than fear. Tommaso was alive, though pale and furious at being confined to bed. Nico brought him contraband espresso in a soup thermos and claimed it was medicinal. Maria threatened both of them with God and a wooden spoon. For one bright hour, the house almost sounded human again. Then Adrian called, from my old bakery landline. The one that should have been disconnected. I answered on instinct. Sophia, his voice was ragged, breathless. Don't hang up. My entire body went cold. Where are you? It doesn't matter. It matters to me. A laugh, wrong somehow, thin and frightened and not enough to hide the rot under it. I never wanted this, he said it was only a ring. Only papers. Who, you know who, Corrado, my hand tightened on the receiver. What did you do? I told him where your grandmother kept things I didn't know, my vision tunneled. You sold my life for money. I was in debt. So was I. Silence. Then, urgently, listen to me. He'll kill me if I don't bring him something. Meet me once, bring the ring. We can end this. It was stupid, obvious, a trap with its teeth showing, I knew that. I also knew men in Dante's world settled things with violence, and men like Adrian were sometimes still foolish enough to believe apologies could alter trajectory. I'm not bringing the ring, then bring the recipe strip, he says that's enough. There, not about me, never about me, I should have hung up and taken the phone straight to Dante. Instead I went myself. Maybe some broken part of me needed Adrian to see what he had done to my face, to hear me say it where he could not escape behind voicemail and distance. Maybe innocence is not only softness, maybe sometimes it is the arrogant belief that other people can still be reached. I left through the herb garden gate in Maria's coat and walked 2 blocks to the church parking lot across from my bakery, where Adrian used to wait for me after closing with cheap coffee and grand plans. Rain from the night before still held in the potholes. He was there, so were 4 men I didn't know. The disappointment was instant and clean. Adrian stepped forward, thinner than I remembered, eyes red-rimmed, hands shaking. Soft, don't, he flinched, good. You let them into my father's bakery. I thought they'd search, that's all. I laughed once because grief and contempt sound alike at a certain pitch. You thought criminals would borrow the place politely. One of the men behind him moved. Everything in me went still. Where's Corrado? I asked. A voice answered from the church steps. Closer than you'd like. He descended slowly, immaculate in a dark coat, silver at his temples, smile mild enough to be trustworthy if you were stupid. I saw it then, the resemblance not of face but of discipline. Corrado wore calm like Dante did. But where Dante's silence protected what he loved, Corrado's devoured what other people loved and called it order. You were easier to draw out than I hoped, he said. I didn't bring the ring, I know. His eyes skimmed my empty hands. You brought honesty instead, it may be rarer. I backed up once. 2 men closed behind me. Dante trusted you, I said. Corrado's expression barely shifted. Dante trusts ghosts. It is one of his less useful habits. They took my phone, my keys, the tiny folding knife Maria had pressed into my coat pocket and called a city girl's prayer. Adrian tried not to watch. That was the moment I stopped hating him as a man and started hating him as a weakness. Corrado led me through the church basement and into an old annex below street level that had once been a small chapel. No windows, stone walls, 1 iron chair, the air smelled of mildew and old wax. You don't seem surprised, I said when he shut the door behind us. I've been waiting to meet you properly. He folded his gloves with infuriating care. Rosa Bellini was a brave woman, sentimental. That was the problem. What did my grandmother do? She hid Elena Salvetor for 1 hour too long. The world narrowed to his mouth. Elena, I repeated, Dante's mother. Corrado inclined his head. She thought she could take the ring and vanish before her husband's enemies found her. Rosa tried to help. I admired it in theory. I tasted metal. You killed her? I let consequence do its work. His smile thinned. Dante has spent years blaming outside enemies for what love actually ruined. There it was, the mirror, not a monster. A man who had decided attachment was a structural flaw and built his life around proving it. I understood then why Dante's silences sometimes felt like grief wearing armor. Corrado crouched in front of me. Tell me where the accounts are. I don't know, you do. He nodded toward my hands. You understand the code. That makes you dangerous in a way beauty never could. I said nothing. He studied me for a long moment, then smiled again, almost kindly. This is what unsettles him, isn't it? Not your face. Your refusal to bend toward self-preservation first. I wanted to spit at him for seeing it. Instead, I kept silent because for the first time in my life I understood silence could be an act, not an absence. Hours passed, or minutes. In a room like that, time spoiled. At some point the door opened and Adrian was pushed inside, blood on his lip, terror stripped clean of excuses. Tell him, he begged me, please. Corrado stood behind him. Last chance. I looked at Adrian and saw every version of the life I had almost lived collapse into one weak, shaking man. No, his face crumpled. Corrado sighed as if I had disappointed his scheduling. He drew a gun, pressed it to Adrian's neck, and for one terrible second I thought he would make my softness pay in the oldest way there was. Then gunfire exploded upstairs. Shouting, running feet, Dante's name in someone's panicked mouth. Corrado's eyes changed. Too late, I thought, or almost. The first thing I felt was not relief. It was anger at Corrado for touching my life, at Adrian for selling it, At myself for walking into a trap because some wounded, ridiculous part of me had wanted a human ending to an inhuman mess. So when the men outside the basement chapel started shouting and the walls answered with gunfire, I did not scream for help. I moved. Corrado had tied my wrists to the iron chair with nylon cord, neat and cruel. But the chair was old, and old things have weaknesses if you know where pressure lives. My grandmother used to say sugar and steel both tell you when they are close to failure. Listen long enough and they confess. I planted my feet, rocked the chair once, twice, then slammed the back leg against the stone lip of the floor. The corroded weld shrieked. Again, again. Upstairs a man screamed. Adrian was crying now, actual tears. Sophia, stop, be quiet. It was the hardest thing I had ever said to him, not loud, final. The weld snapped on the fourth strike. Pain shot through my shoulders as I twisted, grinding the broken metal edge against the nylon. It bit my wrists. Good, let something else hurt. The door burst inward, not Dante, Nico. He came in wearing a tactical vest, designer shoes ruined by basement water, and an expression of offended disbelief. He raised his gun at Adrian first, then lowered it an inch when he saw the tears. Honestly, Nico said, this is why I avoid men with weak character and poor tailoring. He cut my bonds with Maria's folding knife, which I recognized immediately. She is going to kill me for losing this, he added. Is Tommaso alive, angry, medicinally caffeinated? He hauled me up. Can you run? Yes. Excellent. Because I personally cannot carry you and preserve my lower back. A body slammed into the doorframe behind him. Dante stepped over it. I had seen him dangerous before, in the chapel yard. In the aftermath of blood, this was different. There was red on his knuckles and a dead kind of calm in his face that made everyone else in the room look temporary. His gaze landed on the marks at my wrists, the bruise rising at my cheek, the man I had once planned to marry cowering in the corner. Then it settled on me. No words, just that look. Something in my chest gave way. I crossed the room before I knew I was moving. He met me halfway. His hands came to my face, my shoulders, my neck, checking without appearing to. I clutched his shirt front because if I didn't touch something solid, I might drop where I stood. He bent his forehead to mine, the same mercy as before, except raw now, desperate. Are you hurt? No, a lie, but not the kind he meant. His thumb brushed the bruised line on my wrist and the control in him frayed visibly. He turned toward Adrian. No, I said. The word surprised all of us. Dante looked back. If you kill him now, I whispered, it becomes about him. For 1 second I thought he wouldn't hear me through the blood in him. Then he stepped away from Adrian as if it cost muscle to do it. Nico exhaled. Excellent, murder deferred, I'm writing this down for Lucia. Behind us, men shouted that Corrado was gone. Of course he was. He had never wanted only leverage. He wanted proof of Dante's weakness, of mine. Of the old thesis he had built his life on, that love unmans rulers and soft women get others killed. Outside, rain had started again by the time we reached the cars. Dante opened the rear door and waited. Not ordering, not asking, just there. I got in. At the estate, Maria slapped Nico once across the back of the head for losing the knife, and then hugged me so quickly I barely had time to be startled. Tommaso, white as linen but alive, sat propped in bed downstairs and muttered that next time I wanted adventure I should take up tennis. Lucia rolled her eyes. Please don't encourage her to involve more projectiles. For an hour the house became triage and shouting and gratitude disguised as insult, then it quieted by force. Dante found me in the conservatory after midnight. The glass roof held the rain above us like a second, wavering sky. I stood among cold stone planters and fig trees brought in for wintering, my wrists bandaged, my thoughts still trapped in that basement room. He stopped a few feet away. I should have tied you to the bed. Despite everything, my mouth twitched. That sounds alarming out of context. I'm not joking. I know. Silence. Then he came closer, lifted one hand, and let it hover by my cheek before touching me at all. The restraint mattered more now because I knew what lived under it. I told you to run, he said. I know, and you still came back. Yes, then you don't get to leave me with half-truths anymore. My throat tightened. I don't know how to do this right. Neither do I. That from him felt like a confession. I looked at the rain sliding down the glass. I wasn't brave in that basement. I was angry and ashamed. And I kept thinking that if I broke there, he would be right about you. His eyes sharpened. About me? That caring for someone makes you easier to destroy. He went very still. When he spoke, his voice was low enough that I felt it before I heard it. It does. Then why come for me? A beat. Because some costs are still choices. I looked at him, really looked. At the weariness he hid from everyone else. The bruised shadow under one eye, the fresh cut at his jaw, the man inside the title. My hand lifted before I thought better of it. It stopped at his chest, fingers gathering in his shirt like I was asking permission from fabric because I could not ask from him. He covered my hand with his own, one more almost gone molten. Little saint, he said, and now the name held something raw enough to frighten me. If you stay beside me tomorrow, Corrado will come for the center, not the edge. He'll come to end this through you, I swallowed. Then finish it through me standing. He shut his eyes once. When he opened them, the tenderness was there and more dangerous than violence. He kissed me then, not greedily, not like a man taking, like a man who had stood on the lip of hunger too long and was still choosing care inside it. Slow, careful. The kind of kiss that asked a question first. I answered badly, honestly, with a breath that shook. When he drew back, his hand stayed at the side of my neck, thumb against my pulse. One more night, he said. By tomorrow, one of us may not survive what comes next. And for the first time, I believed him. I helped plan the final meeting at my kitchen table. Not Maria's giant kingdom downstairs, but the small work table in the old bakery office where my father used to balance invoices beside trays of cooling sfogliatelle. Dante had the room swept twice and still stood where he could see every door. Nico sprawled over a chair eating celery with the expression of a man personally betrayed by nutrition. Tommaso, pale but upright, leaned against the filing cabinet because no threat on earth could have kept him in bed. Between us lay my grandmother's coated strip, the ring, and a ledger recovered from Adrian's car after Nico's men found it abandoned near the river. Corrado had used old church charities, wedding vendors, and food shipments to move cash and weapons through city properties. No one watched closely because they looked sentimental. Which meant my skill, weights, ratios, ingredient shorthand, let me read him in ways Dante's men hadn't. You hid this in sugar orders, I said, tracing the columns, not because it was clever. Because it looked domestic, harmless. Dante watched my finger move over the page. That sound like anyone else you know? I looked up. He was not smiling exactly. But the edge of him had softened by a degree I could feel from across the table. Do not flirt over financial crimes, Nico said. I'm trying to maintain professional despair, Tommaso muttered, then stopped talking. The final exchange would happen at La Rosa Hall, of course it would. Corrado wanted symbolism. He wanted Dante in the room where his mother died, forced to choose bloodline over softness and come out sharpened. Villains in stories made speeches. Men like Corrado made architecture out of trauma and waited for other people to walk into it. Dante checked the chamber of his gun, set it down, and met my eyes. You stay in the West Gallery with Maria and 2 guards. I'm coming to the floor. No, I decoded the route and the fallback account. If Corrado pivots, no, the word landed like a gate. I set my hand flat on the table. I am not decoration in this. His gaze dropped to my hand, then lifted again. And I am not sending you where he can put a bullet through your throat to make a point. I held his stare. Then don't let him. Tommaso looked toward the ceiling in the universal posture of a man refusing to witness other people's impossible affections. Nico whispered a short prayer for the doomed and overinvested. In the end, Dante did what he always did when the argument bent close to fear. He compromised only where he could still control the angles. West Gallery, open sightline, 1 earpiece, Maria at my side. At dusk, the ballroom lights came up 1 row at a time. La Rosa was beautiful in a way that made me uneasy now. White marble, mirrored columns, chandeliers that turned every movement into an event. The floor where I had first seen Dante gleamed like a lie. I wore black, not because anyone told me to. Because white belonged to another life, and I was done pretending I could walk back into it if I kept the hem clean. From the West Gallery above, I watched men take their places below. Salvator soldiers near the pillars. Corrado's men entering through the main doors in measured pairs. Dante alone in the center of the floor, no jacket, dark suit cut like a threat. He carried stillness the way other men carried rifles. Corrado entered last. He looked up once, saw me beside Maria, and smiled. I understood then what Dante meant about some men being more frightening when they were calm. The exchange began with numbers, roots, accounts. A briefcase placed on a table and opened under too much light. All the rituals men perform before admitting they came for blood. Then Corrado's gaze returned to me. You brought her, he said. Dante didn't turn. You asked for witnesses. I asked for truth. And you thought those were the same thing? Corrado's smile changed by a fraction. You loved your mother too much to learn from her. For the first time, something visible cracked in Dante's composure. Careful, Tommaso murmured into my earpiece below. Maria's hand found mine on the railing. Corrado took 1 step closer. She thought loyalty could be built on tenderness. She bled for that mistake, and now you've done the same. You crossed a city for a girl who still smells like sugar. Dante's voice went very quiet. Say 1 more word about her. There it was, the second use, clean and lethal. Corrado spread his hands. There at last, not a boss, only a son. Gunfire erupted from the east doors before anyone could breathe. The ballroom shattered into motion. Glass fell, men dropped. Maria pulled me to the floor behind the gallery wall as bullets ripped through the balusters. In my earpiece, shouting layered over shouting, Nico yelling about his shoulder. Tommaso swearing in a way that suggested he'd been hit or nearly. Below, Dante moved through the chaos like he had been born from it. Corrado's men had hidden shooters in the florist alcove and behind the raised bandstand. Angles only visible if you knew the room as intimately as a wedding planner or a boy who had rebuilt it to erase a death. I knew one of those angles. The bandstand trapdoor, I shouted into the earpiece. Under the piano platform left side, Tommaso answered with a curse and changed direction. 2 shots later, one hidden shooter fell. Maria looked at me once, nodded, not approval, acceptance. Dante had Corrado in sight by the head table when Adrian stumbled from behind the drape partition, hands bound, mouth bloody. A shield, of course. Corrado put a gun to Adrian's head and smiled up at me. This is what tenderness buys. Adrian met my eyes. For the first time since all this began, he looked exactly what he was: small, sorry, and far too late. Do it, he whispered to Dante, or me, or God. Corrado fired first. Adrian dropped. Dante fired twice. One bullet took Corrado in the shoulder. The second shattered the mirrored column by his head as men surged between them. Screams, falling glass. The smell of cordite and lilies pulverized underfoot. I don't remember deciding to run. Only being on the stairs, Maria cursing behind me, the ring in my palm like a brand. Corrado staggered toward the old service corridor that led beneath the ballroom, toward the foundation room where Dante's mother had died. I followed because I knew Dante would too. He caught up in the corridor outside the old cellar chapel. Corrado was bleeding badly, one hand braced on the doorframe, gun still in the other. He looked from Dante to me and laughed once through blood. Look at you, he said. You brought her to watch you become me. Dante stopped 10 feet away. No, he said. Then he shot Corrado in the heart. No speech, no flourish, no redemption shaped like mercy, just efficiency. Corrado fell against the stone and slid to the floor, surprise frozen in his face as if some part of him had truly believed Dante required pain to finish this. That cruelty had to be theatrical to count. Dante lowered the gun. His shoulders did not ease. I understood the cost then, not only that he had killed a man once trusted like kin, that he had done it without becoming what Corrado expected, without rage, without spectacle, without letting hatred define the shape of the act. He had chosen ending over indulgence. And it had still taken something from him. Dante, when Corrado's body hit the floor, Dante felt no victory, only absence. The boy who had once waited for his mother in a wedding hall was gone for good now. In his place stood the man who had protected what he loved by putting a bullet through what remained of his blood. Tommaso found us first, alive, limping. Nico arrived seconds later, clutching his arm and complaining, "If anyone says the phrase clean up crew tonight, I'm resigning to a monastery." Lucia would later dig glass from Nico's shoulder while he flirted through gritted teeth, and Maria threatened to sedate him with a frying pan. Adrian died before dawn. Tommaso kept his arm. The ballroom didn't keep its mirrors. Near midnight, after the dead were counted and the wounded stitched and the chandeliers turned off one by one, Dante stood in the ruined center of La Rosa and looked at me. "It is over," he said. And for the first time I believed that too. Peace, it turned out, was louder than war, not all at once. In small, humiliating ways, the absence of men running at 2 in the morning. Maria singing under her breath while chopping parsley. Tommaso arguing with Lucia about physical therapy as if stubbornness were a medical plan. Nico returning to solid food with the spiritual ecstasy of a man reunited with bread. The first week after Corrado died, I kept waking at dawn convinced I had missed a gunshot. By the 3rd week, I woke to kneading dough in the downstairs kitchen, because Maria had finally stopped pretending I was a guest and started pretending I belonged to the work. Which from her felt almost maternal. La Rosa Hall closed for repairs. Half the city pretended not to notice why. The other half sent flowers and condolences, phrased so carefully they sounded like negotiations. Dante spent his days tearing Corrado's roots apart and rebuilding the family's business structure with less rot in it. He did not promise sainthood. Only fewer shadows where children and wedding vendors could be used as cover. In his world, that counted as reform. My bakery reopened in a smaller space on the estate grounds first. A temporary kitchen, they said, though Maria had already bullied 3 contractors into making it permanent. We sold bread to neighborhood churches and desserts to events La Rosa would host again eventually. I wore my father's apron over new marble floors, and sometimes had to step into the pantry and cry for no clean reason, except that surviving is embarrassing when so many other people helped you do it. Dante never interrupted those moments. He learned somehow the exact amount of time to leave me alone before appearing with coffee. He was careful with me in ways that said more than declarations would have. A hand at my back when stairs were dark, standing between me and strange men without making a performance of it. Stopping himself still whenever the air changed between us and my breath caught. 3 times in as many weeks he kissed me and pulled back first. The restraint had become its own language. One evening in October, Nico hobbled into the bakery with a box of cannoli and a grin too bright to trust. "I have news. If this is about your cholesterol," I said, piping cream into pastry shells, "I don't want to hear it. It is not." Lucia accepted dinner. I stared. "Voluntarily," she said, and I quote, "If you continue asking every Thursday, I will either kill you or have soup with you. I am tired, so choose soup." I put down the piping bag. "Nico, that's practically a sonnet." He wiped an emotional tear that did not exist. "I know. We are a people of grand romance." From the doorway, Maria said dryly, "If you wear that shirt, she will change her mind." He looked down at his silk print in offense. "This is designer." "This," Maria said, "is a cry for help." I laughed so hard I had to brace against the counter. Dante entered on the sound of it. He stopped in the doorway, one hand still on the frame, and just watched me for a second. Flour on my cheek. Laughter not yet gone. Nico preening like a doomed peacock. Maria scowling at everyone equally. There was such strange warmth in that moment I almost didn't recognize it as the same life. Later, after Nico left to change into a shirt Maria could tolerate, and Maria went upstairs muttering about men and buttons, Dante stayed behind while I covered the trays for morning. "You're tired," he said. "So are you." "Yes," I turned. He stood close enough that I could smell cold air in his coat, the dark cedar underneath, and the faint sweetness of sugar he had picked up from leaning on my doorway too often. "What?" I asked softly. His gaze moved over my face with that unbearable focus that made every small thing in me feel visible. "The hall reopens in 2 weeks." I nodded. "Maria already has opinions about drapery. I think the contractors fear her more than you." "They should." A pause. Then he reached into his pocket and set something on the counter between us. Not a velvet box, a plain gold band, simple, heavy, warm from his hand. My breath left me. "This belonged to my father," he said. "He wore it until the day my mother died. I had it melted and remade." I looked from the ring to him. "Dante, I don't have a fairy tale in me, Sophia." His voice was quiet, stripped of title and command. "I have a long memory, a violent profession, and a house full of people who will follow your voice into fire if you ask them at breakfast." My eyes burned. He stepped closer. "I can give you honesty. Protection when I can, respect always, and every ordinary day I know how to build." His hand lifted, then settled against my jaw with deliberate care. "If you want them, little saint, they're yours with me. Not be mine, better." Something in my chest gave way so gently it hurt more than the breaks. "I don't know how to do this elegantly," I whispered. "Good, neither do I laughed through the tears. "Of course I did." Then I gave him the only answer that felt true. "Yes." He slid the ring onto my finger with hands that had ended wars and bandaged men, and once opened my fist in a ballroom because he had seen an old wound glittering there. It fit as if it had been waiting. He kissed me after. Slow, warm, no blood in the air, no fear except the ordinary terrifying one of being loved where it can be seen. When he drew back, his forehead rested against mine. "Come home," he said softly. I looked around the bakery, the flour, the cooling bread, the life stubbornly rising around us. I already did. 8 months later, the first wedding I baked for at the restored La Rosa Hall began with a dropped sugar flour, not by me. By a 17-year-old apprentice named Giulia who had talent, nerves, and the tragic habit of apologizing before disasters had fully committed. The rose hit the marble prep counter, shattered at one edge, and she went white enough to match the fondant. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." For one absurd second, I was 24 again, standing in the foyer with a ruined cake and a future in pieces. Then I smiled. "It's only sugar." I picked up the rose, reached for the warmed buttercream spatula, and began repairing the broken petal before the apology had even finished leaving her mouth. Behind me, the kitchen went a little quieter. I didn't have to turn to know why. Dante had come in through the side service door, coat over one arm, 2 guards vanishing tactfully back into the corridor. He paused just inside, as he always did in my spaces, like thresholds mattered more to him than other men admitted. I kept working. "You're late." I was in a meeting. "With men who enjoy hearing themselves talk?" "Yes, that sounds exhausting." It was. Giulia tried to disappear. Dante nodded once to her, which in his language qualified as benevolence. She fled with a tray of sugared almonds. When I finished repairing the rose, I set it beside the others and reached automatically for the pendant ring I wore on a chain while working, the original black enamel ring. Too old and precious for dough-heavy hands. I had a habit now of curling it in my palm while thinking, Dante noticed before I did, of course he did. He came around the counter slowly, no danger in him now, or not danger meant for me. The kitchen smelled of vanilla bean, espresso, and orange zest heating in syrup. Outside, the ballroom staff adjusted chairs for a bride who still believed nerves and joy were separable conditions. "What?" I asked. He looked at my closed hand. I opened it. The old ring lay against my palm, pressed hard enough to leave the faint beginning of a crescent in the skin. For a moment neither of us said anything. Then he took my wrist gently and turned my hand toward the light. "There it is," he said. The words were quiet, not cold now, wondering almost. "What, that thing you do?" His thumb traced the pale mark the ring had made. "You still reach for the broken piece first." I felt suddenly shy, which was ridiculous after everything we had survived. "It was just a sugar rose." "No," he said. "It never is." And because this was months later and peace had made us braver in ordinary places than war ever allowed in desperate ones, he told me the rest. "In the hall that first day, you were humiliated, angry, outnumbered." His gaze lifted to mine. "And you still knelt on blood-cleaned marble to save a crushed flower and straighten a bent ring before you asked anyone for mercy." I've seen men protect pride, power, money, reputation. His hand tightened slightly around mine. "You protect what's hurt." My throat closed around the truth of it. "That's not always wise." "No," he said, and the softness in his mouth undid me more than anything else ever had. "But it's why." "Why her?" He never actually said the full phrase. He didn't need to. I stepped closer until my forehead touched his chest for one brief, private second in the middle of the kitchen. His arms came around me without urgency, without audience, as if this ordinary holding was the most radical thing either of us had ever built. From the doorway, Nico's voice drifted in. "I would like it noted that I knocked emotionally before entering." I laughed into Dante's shirt. Nico leaned against the frame in a respectable suit that almost hid the fact he was Nico. Almost. "Lucia says the seating chart is irrational. Maria says the roses are too pink. And I personally believe weddings should include a canapé station devoted entirely to cheese." From somewhere behind him, Lucia said, "If you eat 12 miniature quiches before the ceremony again, I will leave you in a church parking lot." He brightened. "So you admit we're arriving together." She walked in, elegant and composed, and no longer even pretending Nico did not belong near her. "I admit nothing." "Sophia, the bride, is asking whether the orange cream filling can be less sweet. Tell her yes." Nico pressed a hand to his chest. "You see, this is why civilization survives. Women like you." He vanished when Maria shouted his full name from the ballroom, which apparently meant his life expectancy had shortened again. Lucia followed with the long-suffering patience of a woman who had chosen her inconvenience consciously. When they were gone, Dante looked at the doorway and then back at me. "There was a time I thought this would be impossible." "What, quiches?" "This." His gaze moved over the kitchen, the trays, the repaired rows, my hand in his. "A room where people I would kill for are arguing about frosting." I smiled. "You're getting sentimental in your old age." "I'm 35. Ancient." He kissed my knuckles. "The one with his father's remade band. The one that had never once felt like a cage." In the ballroom an hour later, hidden behind the service doors while the quartet tuned, I watched another bride walk toward another future and felt no bitterness. Only the weight of choice and the mercy of having made mine awake. Dante stood beside me in a dark suit, calm as deep water. When his fingers found mine, the old ring chain still looped around my wrist from work, cool against my skin, I thought about the first time he had ordered me to open my hand. Now he did it himself, carefully, and pressed his mouth to the faint crescent in my palm where the metal had rested. "Little saint," he said, and the name had traveled so far by then it felt nothing like possession and everything like home. Outside the doors, guests rose. Inside them, I looked at the man who had once been all danger to me and was still danger everywhere else, and I loved him without innocence lost. Only changed into something stronger because it had survived knowledge. That was the unresolved part, maybe. Not whether I loved him, I did. Not whether he loved me, he did. It was whether love can ever be entirely clean when it is built beside blood, and whether choosing it anyway is courage or selfishness. I still don't know, but when he opened my hand, I let him. And this time, nothing in me wanted to run. Would you have chosen Dante and let the old life burn for the chance to build this one? When Sophia walked back into his world knowing exactly what it cost, did she do the right thing?